Hi, my name is Dennis Remke, and I live here in Chicago. I'm a dad, and I'm also a financial advisor for over 16 years. I'm thrilled to introduce today's panel. As a dad, I'm grateful for Fathering Together, for bringing together such a collection of thought leaders, disruptors, and organizations working to change our perspective on how dads engage with families and communities and workplaces. As a practitioner, I know the importance of following through on conversations. And as a planner, I think it's really important for us to help our kids better understand money, because if we struggle with money, so will our children. So hopefully today's discussion can help us better understand how to prepare our kids better for money, help them build better habits and advocacy for themselves. So I really hope you get as much out of today as I did, and good luck.
Welcome to today's Father's Friday panel. Father's Friday is a program of Fathering Together created in partnership with dozens of for-profit, community-based organizations and individuals dedicated to improving the mental health of dads, families, and communities. Today's topic is providing support for our child's education at home. I'm your host and moderator, Christopher Lewis, co-founder of Fathering Together and father of two. Now, as someone that has worked in higher education for my entire career, and with a partner who has also worked in education, the value of a child's education cannot be underappreciated. As our child grows more and more, as parents were challenged to consider and think about so many factors when it comes to not only the early years of their formative education, but also all the way through to their high school years, where you're helping them to plan for their future and beyond. Throughout all of this, I know personally, I have found that I've been challenged in many different ways to think outside the box at how I could best support my daughters, as well as prepare them for the journey that they were on. That's why today's topic is so important to me. Today, I'm joined by some amazing panelists who are going to be sharing some of their own thoughts on providing support for our children's education, as well as how we can better support the partners in our lives. I'm going to have each of them take a moment to introduce themselves today. Mel, can you start?
Sure. I'm Mel Faxon. I am the co-founder and COO of Mirza. We are an employer-sponsored childcare insurance company. So really tackling the early childhood side of, financial planning for parents. And I'm also a proud board member of Fathering Together.
Brian?
I'm Brian Page. I am a previous public school teacher of 15 years and now founder of Modern Husbands, where we focus on supporting husbands who want to partner with their spouses to manage the money and home as a team.
Ron.
And I'm Ron Lieber. I'm the father of two daughters, ages 17 and 7. I am the Your Money columnist for the New York Times and the author of The Price You Pay for College, which is all about who pays what and why, and when, if ever, it makes sense to spend up to $350,000 per kid after taxes. And also the author of The Opposite of Spoiled, which is all about how and when and why to talk to kids about money and what to say when you do.
Now, before I get to my first questions, let me remind all of you that are watching today that these panels have been pre-recorded, and you can find additional information and resources at www.fathersfriday.org, including joining the Father's Friday newsletter, as well as being able to get additional updates as our campaign continues. So now on to the first question. So I'm going to start today with, I guess, one question for Mel. Mel, I'm going to start with you. And let's go all the way back before our children are born. What, for you, as you are working with families, what are some of the career considerations and particular pain points parents face during and just following pregnancy, and how can you work through them?
Great question. And I think When we think about, this kind of approach of even before we have kids, so childcare in the US is more expensive than college in over half the country. It's an average of $17,000 per year per child in large counties in the US for kids under 5. And so this is an expense that hits us when we're A, not prepared for it, and B, right as our careers are all also taking off, that kind of early time where we're about to start accelerating in our careers, but we haven't necessarily saved up money yet. And so when we work with parents and we think about the career considerations that they want to, a lot of people are trying to ask questions like, should I wait until I become manager, until I become partner, until I hit certain milestones to then take, that time out of the workforce to have my child? And actually, studies have shown that in almost every case, it's better to have children on the younger side and then go back to work and accelerate after that. There's only a few professions where it makes sense to wait, law being one of them. But in so many cases, we're not financially prepared. So it doesn't even matter. You don't necessarily have that choice to decide. And the US, without paid parental leave, without childcare support, people might not be able to afford to stay at work. So it's a lot of questions, a lot of things to ask yourselves. But I think anything you can do to be proactive and have those conversations ahead of time, whether it's just thinking through, what does childcare look like for us? What are the considerations that we both have and desires that we both have to have careers? And how can we support each other as kind of the first step?
I appreciate that. Now, Brian, as we think about as your child gets a little bit older and you're starting to think about education and preparing your child for education, what are some of the resources, or what are a few ways or resources parents of elementary and middle school students can support their child's education?
Well, as a father of 3 and in a household like most of America, where there are 2 working spouses, I think that it's important to start with what we have time to be able to do as parents. And I want to reiterate the importance of what Mel's company is doing, focusing on making sure that the decision that is made at the point where somebody is expecting a baby, to decide what the career path of the mother would be, the spouse, because those decisions, that singular decision, will have compounding consequences that impact the time we have as parents. So understanding that, my background is to teach personal finance, and I like to combine, when possible, free resources, engaging resources that teach our children money skills, particularly through reading when they're young. It's so important as an educator. I'm sure that if you're listening, you recognize how important reading is frequently to your children, with your children. And if you go to moneyasyougrow.org, Money As You Grow, you'll see a number of free books or parent guides for other books that are available for parents for free, that allow you to teach these money skills to kids, to begin helping them understand the importance of talking openly and honestly about money. But I want to dive just a little deeper. Although I love to talk about money, I think what I really love to talk about is the joy and the happiness and the security and the love money can bring. And I think those are the things that parents can really focus on that schools cannot, in particular, values. So I'll give you 2 examples. One of my favorite books was called The Rag Coat. And when my youngest child was 6, I read The Rag Coat with my child. And in this story, the child takes pieces of clothing and blankets, etc., from all of her friends and family, and she stitches them all together to make this patch-made coat. And her friends are 7, 8, 9 years old, and they're giving her grief for it. because she looks silly, until she explains to them that what she did was she took a piece of all of them and pulled it together, because those are the people in her life that make her feel loved and warm and secure. And she just felt like that a coat full of all of those reminders would make her happy every day. And that's an example of how you can teach empathy to your child, teach your child not to be judgmental. And although it's a money lesson, it dives deeper into shaping who your child is. The second place I would tell parents to turn for elementary, middle-aged students or children is frankly, it's Ron's book, The Opposite of Spoiled. That might have been the most meaningful book that I read as a parent. The focus is how you can teach values through money stories or through experiences. So I'll give you an example of how I took a lesson from Ron's book and applied it to our family. Ron brought up a story where someone was sold on the benefit of giving homeless people money when they were around their children. And the question was asked, why do you do this? That homeless person, is there something better you could do with it? Or, hey, some people think they're trying to scam them or whatever. And the point that the father made was that, if I can teach my child generosity by giving a homeless person $1, and then knowing that that's going to bring about a conversation that follows, it's about as good of an investment I can have with $1. And I've done that myself. And we did it on the way home from a museum when our youngest child was probably 6 or 7 years old. And after I did this, there was a homeless person along the interchange right before you get on the interstate, and we gave the homeless person, I think, $5. And after explaining to our children why we did this, our youngest child said, well, why didn't you give him 20? And my heart warmed realizing that story hit home. So that would be my recommendation to parents, is to dive deeply in understanding how you can utilize what little time we have as parents to make the most of it, to teach them reading skills, money skills, and most importantly, the values that matter most to us.
Thank you, Brian. I really appreciate you sharing that. And Ron, I want to tee you up. That was a great tee up for you, because I wanted to see if you could delve a little bit deeper into some of the ways in which you found in the work that you've done to work with parents, some of the ways that parents can teach their children the value of money, of using money.
Sure. This all got started for me through my work at my day job at the New York Times. My own daughter had started to ask at the ripe old age of 3 all sorts of really complicated questions about money. And it all began with her piping up from the back seat of the car one day, "Daddy, why can't we have a summer house?" And we didn't even know where she got this idea that summer houses existed. We hadn't talked about getting one. We couldn't afford one. And it was funny, right? But she was also asking a pretty serious question. She had already figured out, as most 3-year-olds do, according to a lot of the social science research that's looked at this, she'd already figured out that some people have more, some people have less. There are things in the world that you can get if you can afford them and if you choose to. And there was a thing that she wanted that her parents had either chosen or not been able to get, and she wanted to know why, right? Now, you can sort of brush it off and say that's a, obnoxious or age inappropriate question, or you can choose to do what we did after, I sort of unstuck my hands from the steering wheel, and take it seriously and realize that question and every question that has something to do with money offers an opportunity to sort of take your family on a years-long conversational journey, like the one that Brian had when the homeless person was standing on the on-ramp to the interstate highway, right? And so what I realized, right, was that for all of our differences, for all of our parenting differences, for all the different ways that our families look different and are constructed differently, for all of the ways in which we differ geographically or politically, it's pretty safe to say that we all want to raise grounded, decent children, right? With a sense of good values. And what are those values we probably all share? Well, modesty, prudence, thrift, patience, perseverance, generosity, sense of gratitude, right? Perseverance kind of hanging over all of it, and also a sense of perspective on what you have, why you have it, and sort of, where you stand and hopefully how lucky you are. And it turns out that conversations about money can lead directly to each and every one of those values that we hold dear. So rather than brush off the inconvenient questions that may seem impolitic or impolite, what if we did the reverse, right? What if we embrace those questions and use them to steer our families on conversational journeys? And once I figured that out, I realized that I couldn't just keep blogging about it on the New York Times' website, that it was ultimately the foundation for an entire book.
Now, with the book that you wrote, I want to go a little bit deeper on that. And I know that it made a big impact on Brian and definitely helped him with the raising of his own kids. Talk to me about some of the biggest lessons that people are taking out of the concepts and what you're hearing back from the actual readers that you didn't expect when you wrote it.
Sure. I think one of the things that I did not expect, and that frankly I struggled a little bit with, in my own household before and as I was writing, was how to get kids to embrace the idea that giving money away is actually a good idea. And that when you do, all of the opportunities that exist in the world to do some good with whatever it is that you have. So, I'm a believer in this notion of a 3-jar allowance system. And I didn't invent it, but, I put these 3 jars on the cover of my book for a reason, which is that, the spending jar is about modesty and prudence and thrift. And, saving is about perseverance and patience. And the give jar is about generosity and gratitude. And we couldn't quite, and other families have suggested this to me too, couldn't quite articulate, the reasons for the gift jar, right? To whom much is given, much is expected, right? Well, a 5-year-old getting started doesn't really get that, right? This concept of giving back, right? Well, giving back to whom, right? I mean, it doesn't quite make sense. Maybe you give because God commands you to give, but, most grownups haven't completely worked out their personal relationships with God, if any. Trying to impart it to a 5-year-old is hard. So what we eventually figured out, and I started to preach literally, and, all of the speaking I do all over the country about this, was that the best way to get at this, and, this came in part from the feedback I got from parents who were struggling with it, the best way to impart this is to talk about your own family's history of having been helped itself, right? Every family has one. My wife is the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. My mom is a 35-year plus survivor of premenopausal breast cancer. My family kind of busted up financially when I was in middle school, and the Lieber kids were almost evicted, but like the board of our private school met in special session to effectively pass the hat to make sure the Lieber kids, could stay. And our kids know all of those stories, right? And they've seen the actual pie chart of how we give and to whom, and how our experiences of having been helped affect and are reflected by that history, right? So, your history is different than mine, but whatever it is, tell your kids those stories, right? Because once they take them in as their own, that's something, those are stories or things that you can actually live by via your own giving in your kid's gift jar. And so I didn't have that figured out. It took actually writing the book and hearing the feedback from readers before I began to be able to articulate it for myself and to try to help other people with it.
Thanks, Ron. Now, Mel, we've been talking a lot about teaching kids about finances and families. And I know that you work with a lot of families within MRSA and just in general. And one of the things that we also heard that Brian was talking about that, or actually I think Ron had talked about the importance of teaching your kids about being thrifty and showing the value of money and things like that too. One of the questions that I guess that I have for you is this, is I at the same time, I see that we also need to be teaching men the importance of being equal partners with their partners, their spouse or the other person in their life, the other parent potentially in their family, and teaching their kids about the impact that that has, not only on the family, but on the family finances as well. How can fathers work as teammates with their partners to parent together equally?
Another really great question. And I think, Brian, I think Modern Husbands really aligns with this kind of question too, is how do fathers participate more equally? I'll start with some data to support this. So there was a study in Sweden that found if dads took 1 month of solo paid parental leave or just solo parental leave without their spouse being home, then the woman saw her career and her salary income increase by 7% over the next 5 years. And that's because that dad had to learn how to share the mental load. So while he was home alone with those kids, he learned what needs to go in the diaper bag. He learned, how many extra wipes to pack, how, all of the kind of pieces that go into care, and not just, kind of being home and helping out with your partner also there, but really having to own that kind of planning and foresight ahead of time. And so even just the 1 month made a huge difference. And I think that kind of carries in. And I think, Ron, you mentioned this as well, of the communication side of how do we both understand what our responsibilities are, what needs to be done, and how do we both share that mental load as parents and going into raising our family, and how do we then communicate that out and I think the idea of presenting this as a team. How do we work together that our family is a team? It's not just you and me, it's everybody. So when we first start out, it's how do you and I as partners, as spouses share this? And then as kids get older, how do we bring them in to say, hey, we're all contributing to this team structure, and we're all going to have responsibilities that help us all become smarter, whether that's chores around the house or the gifting jar or whatever that might be, but really facilitating this as an effort that everyone has to participate and everyone has a role and a way to contribute for the success of like the whole family. So it's not just me and myself, it's we, and really stressing that.
And from your perspective and the men that you're working with, why don't you give me your take on that same question?
I'm sorry, Chris, did you say something?
I had just asked if you could answer from your take in the work of the men that you work with. Could you give your take on that same question?
Yeah, so I think as a society, at least in the United States, I still believe that we are failing many women, and we're failing fathers. And the system that we have in place is run based on, in many cases, societal norms that are contrary to what we know from research that is in the best interest of happiness in marriage and child development. So let me give you an example to piggyback off Mel. When fathers are actively engaged with their children from birth up until the first 2 years, and they share, as Mel brought up, the mental load, taking the time to think through and be considerate of learning opportunities, bathing your child, changing their diaper, being active in their lives. Those children are cognitively better off because their fathers are involved. Yet the way our system is set up is that there are natural assumptions that when a woman gets pregnant, she now all of a sudden is the one that has to be the flexible one. Her career often takes a back seat. And the division of labor continues to fall unfairly on women. And that creates two problems. The first problem is that it's not practical. If you're looking at generating the best household environment you can, looking at it pragmatically, women have great opportunities for earning power. And if you step back and look at skill sets and opportunities, in 45% of instances, according to Pew's latest survey, women are now either out earning men or earning roughly the same. So why, if you're a teammate, would you want your teammate to contribute less when your teammate could actually be a significant contributor? And secondly, in doing that, you're also robbing men of more opportunities to spend more time with their children. And the issues that arise from that are difficult to quantify. But let me give you an example. If you are taking most of the professional labor on, and you get home and you're exhausted, you are less likely to be astute to the teachable moments that require patience and time. So if your child is upset, you can't just react. You have to be thoughtful. You have to probe. You have to figure out why are they upset and figure out how you can somehow redirect them. That is something that takes patience. That is not something that happens easily if you're working 70 hours a day, nor is it something that happens easily if your wife was home alone all day with the children and has been dealing with that for 11 straight hours. So both of you have a patience deficiency. Looking at it more practically, how can you figure out with two spouses, how can you work together as teammates to create a home that is running efficiently and also is nurturing for your children?
Now, Mel, I guess one of the questions that I pull from that is, in talking about that equitable working place, how can men advocate for an equitable workplace and equitable workplace policies that allow for family-friendly work environments, that allow for employees of both genders with children to thrive in the workplace?
So I think a lot of it is not only advocating for, but then also taking advantage of those policies. So one of the best things to come out of COVID was a flexible working environment. So for those of us who are able to work from home, it's only 40% of the workforce, but that's still pretty significant. And so this new hybrid kind of workforce situation that we're in is great. The risk is that if only women take advantage of that hybrid or work from home policy and men continue to go into the office and have face time, we'll actually continue to further the gender gap. So when we have flexible work policies, when we have work from home, we need everyone to take advantage of those equally and not just women or the primary caregiver of the family. I think advocating for equal parental leave policies, like the study that I mentioned, we need dads to be able to take parental leave to feel comfortable doing it. And then if you have that policy, take advantage of it, especially if it's paid and there's no risk on you. That's a huge one. But it's also things like leaving to go coach coach your kids' sports, or saying, hey, I have daycare pickup today, I can't have a meeting at that time. Dads just being open about their care responsibilities as much as women, and normalizing that parents in general have those responsibilities is a big one. If you're not a dad, but you're at work, can you make sure that core meeting hours are not during school pickup hours? Can you just think about the fact that other people on your team might have those care responsibilities, and make sure that you're not putting anyone in disadvantage by scheduling that 4 p.m. meeting? So things like that, where just being aware of the fact that a lot of people do have caregiving considerations, childcare, is a great way to do it. But I think just making sure that you as a man are also taking advantage of those policies, even if they're more geared towards traditionally women.
Appreciate that. Brian, I want to kind of go back to some of the things we were originally saying. We were talking about teaching kids and working with kids from a young age about money. But really, some of the things that you were talking about made me think of the concept of developing and teaching your kids about a growth mindset, because of the fact that there's going to be setbacks in life. There's going to be things that are going to hold people back. And sometimes it is money, sometimes it's not. And I know with the work that you do with kids, with men, you're also helping to teach that growth mindset. So what is a growth mindset, and how can parents best support the development of a growth mindset in their kids?
So there's significant research on this, led by initially Dr. Carol Dweck, that highlights how damaging a fixed mindset can be relative to a growth mindset. So just in everyday language, a fixed mindset means that you are evaluating success based on some arbitrary score. So if you're at school, you take a test, you get 100%, now you're a success. Whereas a growth mindset would be that same student earning a 70% on the test and being curious enough and persistent enough to go back, relearn some of the material, and then take the test and do a better job next time. And my thesis in my master's degree was ability grouping. And what the research says is that ability grouping actually has negative impacts on our smartest and our brightest children, because at a very young age, they're told by their teachers and they're told by their parents how smart they are. And so now their self-worth, their identity is built upon this fixed mindset, this idea that they're smart. And as that child gets older and they're ability grouped in school, they're put around other smart kids. And the challenge with that is that their self-esteem takes a hit, because they realize as they look around the room that they're not special, because they were told they were special because they were smart. And those students oftentimes fizzle out over time because they have missed the opportunity and the beauty of learning, which is capitalizing on curiosity. That's all it is. And as parents, it's important to recognize that some of our children are born very smart, but that should never be something that makes them special. What should make them special are opportunities for them to show grit, perseverance, and most importantly, seek opportunities to learn through failure, recognizing that the most meaningful lessons are the lessons that you don't get the first time, that it takes energy, it takes curiosity, it takes grit to be able to work toward the harder, challenging problems and understand those. And that it's the process itself that gets them there that should be celebrated, not the end result. And that filters all the way through into life. When you think about whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're a manager, we're thrown problems at us constantly. And our responsibility is to solve problems. Our responsibility is to recognize that we're going to make mistakes, and those are learning opportunities. And that if your child was raised in a way where they recognize that failure can be learned from, they're more likely to be successful as they get older.
Now, Ron, Ryan just talked about the fact that in the growth mindset that you're capitalizing on curiosity. And a little bit earlier, you talked about your own daughters and what led you into some of the work that you've done in working with families and kids. I'm sure that in the work that you did in your first writing your first book, but also working with families and the work that you do and the writing that you do, that you've got some stories and I'm sure that you could be here for many hours in the stories that you could tell. But do you have some favorite stories about teaching money lessons to kids that you could share with us?
Sure. I mean, I think my all-time favorite was a family out in California. There were 9 or 10 kids in the family, And the dad just decided one day, apropos of absolutely nothing, that he was going to bring home his entire paycheck in cash and show his kids, ages like 6 to 17, exactly what it was after taxes. So this turned out to be a complicated thing to accomplish because Wells Fargo apparently didn't have that much money laying around. His conceit or his stunt was that he wanted to bring it all home in single dollar bills. So, he needed to give the bank a little bit of warning. So, a day or two later, they literally give him this sack of cash. It was his monthly take home pay, and it was, something like $9,000, right? So his family was slightly above average in terms of what they were making. So without warning the kids, he just shows up one day, an hour before dinner, and he just dumps it all in a big pile on the table. And then he said, "This is all the money that I made this month. And now I'm going to divide it in piles to show you all of the places that it needs to go." Right. So there was the mortgage payment, and there was the light bill, and there were all the after school activities, and there was the grocery, and there was the 10% tithe to the church, and a handful of other things. And by the time he was done, there wasn't really a whole lot of money left over. So, he's got these piles and he's labeled them, and the kids are all sort of oohing and eyeing, the younger ones want to play with the money. And then he just looks at them and says, "Any questions?" And, every kid had a question. And, this went on for an hour or an hour and a half or whatever it was. But, not only did it, open up, a dozen lines of exploration and explanation, but it sent a message, right? That, this money stuff is never off limits, right? And, while we have enough, and maybe even slightly more than enough, there are limits, right? This is all we get. And it's got to go a long way, and it's got to be shared among all of us. And so, I think it might have given the older ones pause about the kinds of things that they asked for beyond the things that they needed. And, I felt like it was a pretty good lesson in transparency.
Chris, can I follow up with that's my favorite lesson from that book?
Mhm.
My second favorite lesson that is particularly germane from Ron's book is when he was traveling the country and looking at colleges, interviewing people, he brought up the College of Worcester. And Ron, feel free to jump in if I get any of this wrong.
Mhm.
But they had a program that was more designed as like a project-based program. And that rather than a traditional paper pencil test, students had to tackle a problem. And that he's noticed throughout a lot of different schools that between that and the business community, that really what people were looking for in the workforce was a liberal arts education with some Excel type skills bolted on. Did I get that right, Ron?
Yeah. That's about right. And what it amounted to, or the language that the college um doesn't necessarily approve of, but at least translates well to most people who have gone to an undergraduate institution, is that what they have at the College of Worcester is a mandatory thesis. But it can be any number of things depending on whether you're in the sciences or in the arts. But they want to give everybody the opportunity to tackle a big thorny project or question over the course of an entire year and work with a professor one-on-one at least once each week for a not small amount of time, such that a sort of mentorship relationship is likely to form, and more likely to form than it would at a larger institution. And then every year they throw a sort of academic Woodstock in April where every single senior presents right? And there was so I went, right, and it really is like, the whole campus shuts down. There's no classes. A whole bunch of parents and alumni come, and you just wander around from building to building. There's this master schedule, and hundreds and hundreds of 22-year-olds are just showing off what they spent the year doing. And what was a music and econ double major, and he did two projects. So he was over in the music department at 1 p.m. Singing an hour's worth of songs that he had written, set to the words of that year's poet laureate, who happened to be from Ohio. And then at 4 o'clock, he was over in the econ building explaining in fine detail the sort of pricing mechanisms, the inefficient pricing mechanisms that are in place at private and nonprofit hospitals, right? And it's just like, if you're trying to figure out, all right, well, am I going to pay $25,000 a year for, the flagship state university, or potentially many thousands of dollars more for a private liberal arts college like the College of Worcester? What exactly is it that you're buying up to, right? So that was the example of a kind of thing that, mostly doesn't go on at the flagship state university, that, felt sort of visceral and real to me. And, the whole reason to start these conversations about money with kids at the age of 5, as opposed to, the age of 18 or 25, which is the way it works a lot of the time, is that, kids are ever more full-fledged participants in this enormous and consequential decision that you make, when they're 17 or 18, about what to pay for college, right? And so if you haven't spent 10 or 12 or 14 years kind of getting ready for that through all sorts of exercises and conversations in your family about 2-figure amounts and 3-figure amounts and 4-figure amounts and 5-figure amounts, how can you expect them to really get their heads around an undergraduate education that could cost up to $350,000 these days, right? Not to mention the tens of thousands of dollars in debt that the kids may take on. And then who knows, right? What else, what sort of sacrifices the parent or parents have to make. So, the college conversation and the kids and money conversation, they're all of a piece. They're on a continuum.
And when I thought about Worcester, when I thought about, the essentially business community is looking for thinkers, the reason I feel like it's germane is because of AI, ChatGPT. If we have a very slow moving education system, it's this giant tugboat that resists change. If I was a teacher right now, based on my limited experiences playing around with ChatGPT, I would take all of my curriculum and I would throw it away. I would start from scratch, because the world is going to look completely different. There's no sense in having paper pencil tests anymore. It's stupid. You can turn to AI, it's done. And AI is going to do the work that many of us were doing. How, in a world of AI, can we teach our children to be productive, to earn a living, to kind of grow their careers? It's a different look. And it's certainly not a world of memorization. It's a world of curiosity, a growth mindset, problem solving, and utilizing AI, not using AI in the way that replaces a job.
Ron, you started talking about some of the things that you learned with the College of Worcester and some of the things that built from being a young, kind of having the conversations with your young child, leading those into the conversations as you get into college. Are there any other pieces of wisdom that you want to share today with parents that are at that point or getting ready to be at that point of looking at college and that bigger price tag down the road, that could help them to maneuver through that process a little bit easier?
Sure. I'll run through a couple. I'd say, there's a lot in the price you pay for college about the sort of ways in which colleges price and discount differently than they used to, and how that whole system works. But there were a couple things sort of at the front end that I hypothesized were wrong with the way that families were approaching this enormous decision. And I set about trying to sort of prove or disprove my theories about the incorrectness of the way that we're all approaching this. And, there were a couple things that I ended up concluding or confirming. The first is that we're shopping for this all wrong, right? We don't have a sense of what it is that we actually are buying. We haven't asked ourselves the questions, right? What is the definition of success here? And then, as far as the money goes specifically, we're not approaching the question in an emotionally intelligent way. So let me start with the first one, kind of a more consumerist approach to college. Most people are shopping for three things without ever realizing it or, interrogating themselves about which one is truly important or more important than the others, right? We're shopping for an education, right? For the kid's brain to be rearranged in different pieces and hopefully turned into a, better version of itself. We're shopping for kinship, right? The people who will sort of pick us up and carry us through life. And that's not just your peers, it's also your mentors, right? It's a professor, it's an administrator. I'm still buddies with the financial aid director, from 35 years ago. It's your academic advisors. It could be clergy members at your school, really any grown up who can help you kind of drag you into a better version of yourself, right? So that's number two, kinship. Number three is the credential, right? You're looking for a piece of paper that can help vault you up the social class ladder a couple of rungs, maybe beyond where your parent or parents managed to land themselves. Or you're looking for a credential that can open the door to institutions, to employers, to worlds that you never could have imagined for yourself. And so just about all the time, people are shopping for one of those three things or two or three in different proportions. And so I sort of feel like you haven't done your job as a parent without really bearing down on those three things and how important they are. Because only then can you figure out, all right, well, how much more am I willing to spend, right, for an experience that I think might be more kind of fruitful for my kid. And then on the emotionally intelligent side, right, I mean, it's so easy. And we see it from the 1.7 now trillion dollars in student loan debt that's out there. It's so easy to spend more than we can afford or more than we have. So why would we do that, right? Well, I think we have to interrogate ourselves emotionally. Are we tempted to spend that much out of fear? Fear of our kids falling down the social class ladder to wherever it is that we've managed to scramble up to and hang up to dear life, right? I think that's some of it, right? We don't want our kids to take a step backwards economically. I mean, forget about the idea that every kid is supposed to do better than their parents. I think a lot of us have sort of given up on that or just hoping our kids can maintain wherever it is we've managed to get to, right? So fear, guilt, right? Guilt that we have chosen professions where we do not make enough, guilt that we have not saved enough, guilt that we can't do for our kids what our parents did for us, right? It's so easy to fly off on these guilt trips where, the destination is just, paying the list price and yanking money out of home equity or borrowing sort of to the hilt. And I think we should question how much guilt is actually affecting our decision making. And then there's snobbery and elitism, right? Private is better than public. Ivy walls are better than 1960s cement bricks. And that the institution with the bumper sticker that will impress more people or that people have heard of in your community is the one that's really going to lead to the most happiness. So I think it's important for every parent, for parents together, where two parents are involved, for you to have the conversation with your ex if you've got one of those, and certainly to have these conversations with your kids. And then and only then are you ready to set a budget and go shopping. You don't do that stuff on April 28th when everybody is freaked out and you've got four choices in front of you and you can't figure out what to do.
Such great advice. And I really appreciate you sharing that. And as we get close to the end today of our time together, I want to have each of you think back to that initial topic that we started down the road of. And I think we could keep talking for hours on end today. but we initially started and said, hey, we're going to be talking about providing support for our child's education at home. We've talked about it in a lot of different ways. There's the monetary support. There's looking at, how we can teach our own kids to better themselves throughout their own lives, helping them get ready for conversations about their futures and how they prepare for those futures, but also thinking about the home itself and supporting the people around us to better the situation at home as well. So as you think about this topic, what's one other piece of advice you'd want to give to our listeners today? They want to leave them with that could help them in providing better support for their own child's education in their own homes. And I'll start with Mel.
I'm not even sure it's necessarily a new thought, but it's just driving home to be proactive and have communication. So like the best thing you can do is have the hard conversations with your partner, have the conversations with your kid, with your family, with your kids, and then think about all of these things with enough time to set all of you up for success. I think is my key takeaway.
Brian?
So I'm sure you've figured out, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I feel like that the new world is about being a great self-learner, a critical thinker, ensuring that the social and emotional side of learning is a part of a priority for parents. So I know this is going to sound like a commercial, but I created a course called Self-Help Homework Hacks. And the reason I created that is because I feel like that in many cases, schools do a poor job teaching students the science of independent studying. And there are strategies that are extremely effective and that can help kids learn more material in a shorter amount of time. And the reason I created Self-Help Homework Hacks is because parents are in a position now, and I'm one of them, where their kids are bringing homework back home to you, where it could be like the new math that you don't understand. It could be calculus where you've got to like really think back, where it's hard for you. You might get it wrong. You might not be able to help, or you flat out just don't have the time to sit down for an hour and a half or 2 hours to help. It's not like it was when they were 7, 8, 9 years old and you're sitting with them reading a book. So focus on making sure they understand what those strategies are. So you're empowering them to solve their own problems. You're empowering them to be self-learners. So when they do leave home, they don't need you over their shoulder to be able to help you with those types of tasks.
Mm-hmm. And I keep coming back to the word practice, right? And, there are a number of definitions to that word, but I'm thinking about two. I'm thinking about, first of all, the noun practice. Every family, whatever its size, whatever its philosophy, ought to have a practice of talking to kids about money and educating them through those conversations. So maybe that practice is a gratitude ritual where every night you raise a glass to someone or something that was great during the day. And that begins to, help you understand how good you have it on a daily or weekly or annual basis, and maybe inspire some generosity towards others who may not have it as good as you, right? Or maybe there is a spending practice where, the whole family pitches in on a budget for, an annual vacation. Maybe there's a giving practice where the kids get to weigh in on how much money the parents give away or to whom. But then there is actual practice, the verb. Kids should be practicing money, right? It starts with allowance, but, eventually you can make them responsible for ever larger purchases, whether household ones or ones that, affect them specifically. And again, right, the end game here is that, a bunch of them are going to go to college, or they're going to go to trade school, or they're going to go into the military and need to figure out what those benefits are, or they're going to go out on their own and need to be ready at the age of 18 or 19 to sort of fend for themselves financially. If they have not been practicing, and if there has not been a practice of conversations and rituals around money, they're not going to be in such great shape to sort of launch themselves into adulthood. And, that as much as anything is the reason to start early.
Now, before I finish up today, also, I just want to give each of you an opportunity to be able to tell our our viewers today how to find you. So if you can just kind of share that, and then we'll go from there.
Sure, I can kick it off. So you can follow Mirza. Our website is Hey Mirza, HEYMIRZA.com. And Mirza says hey on most socials. So definitely follow us along if you want your employer to help you offset the costs of care. Reach out to me. Also happy to have those conversations. So
And you can find me at modernhusbands.com, and all the socials are Modern Husbands. And that's where you can also find information about the course.
Please excuse me while I type in heymirza.com to my browser before I forget. Brian, I know how to find because I first found him for a New York Times story a bunch of years ago, which all of you should look up. I don't want to spoil the incredible journey he used to take his students on that I tagged along for one day. You can find me at the New York Times at nytimes.com/Lieber in your favorite browser of choice. That's a sort of directory of all the stories that I've been writing recently. ronlieber.com is my personal website, where you can find out more about my books, and soon about the video course on Merit Aid for family shopping for college that I've put together. And Ron Lieber, just at Ron Lieber, Instagram, Twitter, for as long as I can stomach it, and LinkedIn as well.
I want to thank everyone for listening in on our panel today. I know I've learned a lot, and I appreciate all of our panelists for sharing their wisdom and their own stories with all of you. We'll have another panel next week going live on YouTube with more resources and strategies to help you to improve yourself, your families, and your communities. If you want to get more involved with Fathering Together, Father's Friday, or any of the important work that we've discussed today, please contact Fathering Together at info@fatheringtogether.org, or fill out the Get Involved form on our website at fatheringtogether.org. Our goal is to help you be emotionally courageous, connected, and committed to those who matter most in your life. I hope this discussion today provides a few more insights and strategies for you. We'll see you next week.